get my 6. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid and whatever the hell this channel's about. Today, it's about me wondering just how many of these older houses in Virginia like ours have skeletal remains buried in the basement. Speaking of skeletal remains in the basement, I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. Anybody who wants to act like they don't have skeletons in their closet probably don't, because they've got so many skeletons, they're down in the basement and they got a basement full of them. I'm not saying these folks are serial killers, but certainly sociopathic, and I would run as far away from them as possible. I want to give a shout out to longtime and supportive viewer Timothy Howard, who commented on my video from a couple days ago about how he says, you know, Kevin, I'm reading in the comments that you're quitting YouTube, you're stopping YouTube, and people are begging you not to quit. He says, I watched the video and that's not what I'm getting from this. He says, what I'm getting from this is that you're saying goodbye to the old you who would live in fear of some of the lunatics in your past coming out to dredge up the past in a public forum. Timothy, you get it. And welcome. It's nice to know you're among the minority of people who actually watch the entire video rather than read a headline, click, read the first few comments, and then comment like they know something and then move on to another video on another channel. Yeah, that's all that was. That was me taking the gloves off, and here's why. Because in October, when I come out and read to each and every one of you willing to listen on this channel, each and every story from October Nights Part 2, 31 more tales for the Halloween season, I'm coming out swinging bare-fisted. The gloves are off. Listen, here's my take on those who would attempt to extort me and try to hold, perhaps, embarrassing facts over my head and false narratives. Okay? Number one, you obviously don't get what I mean when I say I don't care about what other people think of me, because I stopped caring about what other people thought of me 10 years ago when I was down and out in the Philippines and trying to figure out how to feed and allow to survive my infant son. Okay? And when I stopped caring, a whole new world opened up, a whole new world of opportunities of being able to be myself, do me, be me, the best me I could possibly be, understanding I have to be because everybody else is already taken. Number two, you want to try to extort me with what you think might be embarrassing facts? I'll beat you to the punch. I'll do it. I'll come out and extort myself. Okay? Like Eminem said in the final rap battle scene of his movie 8 Mile. Here, I'm outie. Now tell these people something they don't know about me. And that's exactly what I did with that video the other day. This guy, aka Crazy Lake, ain't going nowhere. I've been left for dead once and I didn't like it. So I've dug my way out of the earth and come out of the grave, and I'm back, and I'm not going anywhere. Hey, you just wait till October. Tick-tock. Now, with this said, those of you who didn't watch the video in its entirety the other day missed the gift I was giving, not just more of the real me without concern of what other people think, but the freaking email for the channel that you guys have been clamoring about. You wanted to know how to get in touch with me. You wanted to tell me your scary stories, your spooky stories about some abilities you have, these gifts. We now have an email here on the channel where you can do that. It's on our About page, but I'm going to tell it to you here and now. It's, dang it, I forgot my email address. No, I'm just kidding. It's crazylake@mail.com. How much simpler could it get, other than if I were to take a Sharpie and draw on this shirt that viewer in California, Betty Brooks, sent me? It's, well, yeah, crazylake@mail.com. Send me your stories. And before I get into today's story about all these skeletons underneath this old house here in Virginia, I want to say thank you to at least 1,000 of you, well, 900 of you, who went over to my buddy Travis Daigle's channel. It's called Fighting Past 40, and subscribed. He's over 1,000 subscribers now. I thought we could do it in 2 days, but it took us 4. So, which is great. I mean, he's been doing this YouTube thing, the social media thing for years, been struggling to get traction. You are that traction. Thank you. And I'm so happy that so many of you have enjoyed his content. If you want to be inspired, if you want to feel motivated, me getting the balls to come out and make that video the other day is a direct result of me having talked to him on the phone for an hour and 15 minutes. The man's amazing. He is inspiring, and he is going to inspire the masses. I am proud and honored to be part of that journey, as each and every one of you who are part of that journey as well should be. If you're not, get on board. Fighting Past 40. Go over there, subscribe, watch the videos. You're going to love it. Now, like Timothy Howard, many others of you did actually watch the whole video from the other day, and many of you have already emailed, and I'm going to share one of these stories with you today, because that's why I did it. It's what it's all about. And listen, let me tell you about October. As I hydrate, it's 94 degrees right now. Even though I'm going to be coming out here every evening, every October night, and reading you one of these creepy stories. Nightmares. I'm telling you, the stuff of nightmares. If you keep sending me your stories, I'll do 2 videos a day. I'll come out in the mornings and tell your stories, and then come out again in the evenings and tell mine. Okay? Stay hydrated wherever you are. Okay? So, this story comes from an email I received at crazylake@mail.com from a woman named Andrea Johnson in South Carolina. Dear Kevin, I'm so glad you finally got an email address for your channel, because I have a story I've wanted to share with you for a long time, but I didn't know how to get in touch with you. Since I was young, I have had an ability to sense and see things that most people cannot, and that is why I am so drawn to your channel. Have you ever stared at a wall of paneling or a wooden floor and seen faces? I heard a tree knock, and I was getting ready to point out a lot of people see faces in these trees and in the background, so you're not alone here, Andrea. Most people can do this when staring at paneling or wooden floors, and when I had the experience that I'm sharing with you here, and that I give you permission to share or use in any way, I thought that all I was seeing were designs in wood grains on the wooden floor, but I would find out years later that that was not the case. My father had a great aunt who died when I was only 6 years old. I guess we'd go spend a couple of weeks with her in the summer when I was small. She lived alone in an old house in a small town in Virginia. I'm not going to name the town, but it's not far from where you live. It's smack dab in the middle of Richmond and Charlottesville, but trust me, there is very little in between. The beautiful James River flows through the area, but there's not much else to describe the location. I have every reason to believe I know where this is. I have every reason to believe that my family and I go catfishing at this place sometimes. I remember the last summer that we were down there seeing Aunt Gladys. I couldn't sleep a wink at night because I kept seeing faces in the floor of the room I was staying in. The room was in an old house that dated back to the 1880s. It was one of the first houses built in the area during the Reconstruction period following the Civil War. I remember each morning waking up and complaining during breakfast that I couldn't sleep because the faces in the floor kept staring at me. So I guess, you know, she got a little bit of sleep. Maybe in the very wee hours in the morning would finally fall off to sleep. I remember, even as a child, my parents seeming embarrassed and my Aunt Gladys seeming a little nervous. I never really understood the implications of either until just a couple of years later. I heard another tree knock. There's something going on back here. Make sure to continue to get my 6. For you to fully understand the ramifications of the faces in the floor and how this all turned out, there's something you must understand about my Aunt Gladys. She'd been married 5 times. Now that's not too uncommon in the days in which we live, but back then, in the late 1970s, God, I'm old, it was. Please don't refer to yourself as old, Andrea. In the late 70s, I myself was 6, he says as he notices the gray hair. Okay. All of Aunt Gladys's husbands were what one might call losers. No one, according to my mother, could understand her taste in men. One of them she'd actually taken in off the street as a homeless guy. what in the heck a homeless guy was doing wandering around in the very secluded regions of this small rural Virginia location is beyond me, unless he was some sort of fugitive in hiding. As it turns out, that's pretty much what everyone else wrote the guy off as well, as not a year after he married my Aunt Gladys, he took off wandering again. At least that's the explanation that Aunt Gladys gave when all of a sudden the man was no longer around. Almost all of the men were drunks. The family all knew that Aunt Gladys had a time with all of them once they started drinking. 3 of the 5 husbands allegedly got drunk and ran off from her while drunk, and she claimed each time that she couldn't have been happier because it was better than having to continue to live with them. Her last marriage to that homeless guy lasted 3 years, which was actually the longest Aunt Gladys had ever been married. And when he took off, everyone was shocked, even though it wasn't the first time it had happened. However, the man's 4 grown children were a little more than shocked. They were pissed, even though we could never understand why they hadn't been equally concerned about him when he'd been homeless. Anyway, this man's adult children insisted that a thorough investigation be done on Aunt Gladys. They pointed out to the police that it was a little too ironic that she'd had 5 men run off and leave her. The police found no foul play, though looking back, we do believe that it helped Aunt Gladys's case that she checked herself into a psychiatric hospital where she stayed for 6 months, conveniently until the end of the investigation. To say that anyone in our family ever suspected Aunt Gladys of anything malicious prior to the disappearance of her 5th husband after the disappearance of the other 4 would be inaccurate. But after the investigation was launched, a lot of the people in our family, those old enough to be in the know, began asking questions that they'd never asked before. You remember earlier I said it was 94 degrees? Well, it feels like the temperature just dropped about 10 degrees right here where I'm sitting. We got some activity up here in the woods tonight, folks. As we move closer and closer to October and that All Hallows Eve night of Halloween, this veil is getting very, very thin. And coming out here in the middle of this place, a potentially haunted forest, probably doesn't help things. Or it probably does. Let's continue with the story. Aunt Gladys died in 1980. And despite having been married so many times, she never actually had any children. Her house and the 5 acres that it sat on, overseeing a wide turn in the James River down at the bottom of a very steep hill, reverted to my father in her will. He tried renting it out for a few years, but after having renters all but destroy the place, and half of the time not even paying rent and never on time, he said to hell with it all, and he let the house sit. My father passed away a few years later, and my brother got the old farmette. It had reverted to my mother after my father's death, but she didn't want it, so she sold it to my brother for $1. My brother was teaching at the time. He's since retired, and he went to the old house during his summer break the first year he got the house. His plan was to fix it up and use it as a fishing cabin since it sat on the James River. However, the house was so far gone, he decided to have it torn down, and he intended to put a camper in its spot instead. When he had the house torn down, aside from the snake dens and the ground hornets' nests they found everywhere, they also found in an old root cellar that was right underneath the room I'd tried to sleep in all those years before as a little girl, but I could not because of all those faces in the floor staring up at me. 5 skeletal remains of human bodies. All men. That gives me chills. Kevin, I hope you are not leaving YouTube, because I believe that there are many people like me and you, in my opinion, who have gifts that they have no safe place to go with other than your channel to talk about. Like the guy who sent in the story about the hole in the base of a tree and a graveyard that was clearly there one day and then gone the next, which, by the way, is a story from about 2 weeks ago. That was sent in by Timothy Howard, too, who gets a star beside his name for actually watching videos in their entirety, like Andrea. Please come back to YouTube so we can share our stories of strange occurrences with you so that you can, in turn, share them with others. Again, you have my permission to use this story in any capacity that you choose, be it on your YouTube channel or in one of your books or both. Kindest regards, Andrea. Folks, there's a lot of irony to this story. I'm talking about October Nights, part 2 coming up in October. There are a couple of stories eerily similar to this one that are based on fact. There's a very thin line between fact and fiction, and that line, I believe, in recent times has disappeared. Mark Twain, one of my favorite writers, is known for having said that fiction is actually harder to write than nonfiction because fiction has to at least make sense. I don't think it's true anymore. I don't think it holds true anymore. If we look at what's going on in the world around us today, and I'm not talking about the economy and Putin and all this stuff, I'm just talking about the insanity of the common folk on the street. Headlines, terrible, 12-year-old little girl kidnapped and broke her braces chewing through her restraints to get away. In New Jersey today, there's a bolo. Be on the lookout for a white tractor trailer that people saw flying down the highway with a man in the back covered in blood, banging on the window, screaming for help. This is the kind of stuff that once upon a time you would only read about in books written by the likes of Stephen King. Not anymore. Not anymore. You just have to go on to the news. I mean, it's one of the reasons I don't do it. Of course, here I'm quoting these headlines. It's because I check my emails through servers and I know I could skip around it. But just a glance at this stuff, it's terrifying. And I know there's a big movement towards scaring the masses, towards fear, and you've got to scare people to get them to click, to get them to read it. There's another story that you're going to hear in October Nights Part 2 where I talk about when I made the transition away from media to blogging and then to journaling, because there really is no longer ethics in journalism, because even they've gotten into the game. Those who were holding out as recently as 5 or 6 years ago have finally said, well, if we can't beat them, let's join them. And maybe it's not that these things are happening as commonly and as frequently as we're led to believe. Maybe it's just those are the news scoops because that's the ones they know they'll read, and so therefore that's the one that generates the revenue for their news site, their news outlet, their online. But guys, these are scary times, and it has nothing to do with the economy and socio-political events going on around the world. Just people have lost their ever-loving minds to the point to where stories like this, and some of these stories, as creepy and gruesome as they are coming at you in October, almost seem like fairy tales written for children. So folks, again, I'm back. I'm not going anywhere. I appreciate your support. When I came out and shared a lot of those things in that video the other day, all that did was show even more of my human side. And I appreciate those of you who shared with me your similar experiences and how you shared with me that by me sharing, that gave you the courage to share your stuff and allow you to feel not so much alone and not so much like the square peg trying to fit in a round hole. Listen, like I said before, anybody who wants to act like they don't have any skeletons in their closet probably got a basement full of them, and you need to give a very wide berth to those folks when you see them coming. You'll see me coming again here real soon, and I'll see you then next time for more. And remember, email me your stories of all things paranormal and supernatural, cryptozoological, anything, at crazylake@mail.com. Bye.